Raising alarm bells about nuclear weapons this week, saying the threat of nuclear war is at its highest since World War II, calling it an urgent issue that the world must take more seriously. So joining us now to discuss, former U.S. diplomat Jim Chatras. Okay, Jim, first, can we address this UN security expert comments? The highest threat level since World War II is what she says, when it was America that was the sole user of nuclear arms to decimate a civilian population, if we recall, in Japan. But the UN did very little to point out the threat from this particular country. Your thoughts?
Look, as far as the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II, that's something that historians will debate for a long time. Why we did it, what we knew, what the Japanese were willing to do, to what extent it was a threat to the Soviets and so forth. It's amazing how little we talk about the firebombing of civilian in other countries, as like, for example, the destruction of Dresden, for that matter, bombing of Belgrade. I mean, we killed a lot of civilians during the war with non-nuclear weapons, and nobody seems to care that much about that. I think the question for us today is the fact that a number of countries do have nuclear weapons. Obviously, we and the Russians have the biggest stocks, and during the first Cold War, there were agreements set up to try to make sure nothing accidental would happen, that danger could be averted.
What is accidental?
Accidental means you misread the other side's intentions.
Like what's happening with Iran?
With Iran, and also even something that could happen in Europe with the Russians now that we've gotten rid of the INF agreement, the Intermediate Range Force Agreement, and we don't know what the fate of the START agreement is going to be regarding intercontinental missiles. We don't know if those mechanisms of communications are breaking down to where the one side, especially if they have very little advance warning of a possible attack, misread the other side's intentions.
So speaking of that, they did address traditional arms agreements, and that they've been eroded, they say, by the emergence of new types of weapons, new technology. Does the world need to reconsider the whole global arms agreements altogether, let alone nukes? I mean, everybody has weapons now.
Exactly, and look, the Non-Proliferation Treaty itself commits the nuclear powers to work toward eventually getting rid of nuclear weapons, but that also, I don't think, can be divorced from politics and the existence of other kinds of weapons. Let's look at India and Pakistan. Since they've had nuclear weapons, they had 3 wars before they had nuclear weapons, none since they've had them. And so there is a stabilizing aspect to having weapons that everybody feels, well, I'll be extinct if I use these things. So you want to be able to work down to reduce arsenals, reduce uncertainty, but you also don't want to create a destabilizing situation that could lead to a devastating war.
Okay, so it sounds like you say there's a fine line then of having nukes, and not a huge arsenal, but having some, because we know that the decimation it leaves behind.
Yeah.
So you think it can create peace out of that?
I don't know that it creates peace, but
stability?
It's where we are now. In other words, everybody is sitting on top of a pile of explosives, and the question is, how do you get off of it without actually creating? Maybe think about sitting on a live grenade that the pin's already been pulled. How do you get off of it?
Right, somebody's got to hang on to it.
Somebody's got to hang on to it, make sure. And again, I think we can't separate it from the fact that there are political rivalries among countries, and unfortunately, I think part of that is that Washington, the United States, does have this notion of global hegemony, and other powers like Russia and China in particular. On the other hand, this idea that countries are all working to build more weapons. The Chinese and the Indians have reliable nuclear stockpiles. They're not really frantically building more. There's no real race going on. They feel they have enough deterrent effect, and that's what's important to them, evidently.
Okay. So the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons has gathered ratification of 23 countries so far, but it needs 50 in order to bring it up to speed to, rope in all of these new weaponry that we're talking about to the modern day. But the U.S., Russia, and a few other nuclear-capable states, they're the ones who are opposing the ratification. I mean, Thailand has signed on to this, but I mean,
exactly.
What about that? Why are the U.S., Russia, why are they saying no, we don't want to ratify?
Because we're the responsible parties, and they're not. They can yap all they like, but it doesn't matter what they say, because they're not responsible for what happened. We are, the Russians are, the Chinese are. Look, let's not kid ourselves. In the 20th century, we had 2 devastating world wars, killed tens of millions of people even before we got to the nuclear weapons at the very end of World War II. Let's not kid ourselves as simply getting rid of nuclear weapons. It all sounds nice, but how do you get from A to B in a way that doesn't create more problems than it creates? I think it's more important, since we do have them, to find a way to reduce them, to manage their existence and to make them a force for stability rather than one for instability. Now, if one side tries to achieve a first strike capability over the other, which some people read are pulling out of these agreements as a move toward doing, that is destabilizing and very dangerous in my opinion.
Okay, so we've got to leave it right there. I know there's so much more to talk about, but it sounds like the takeaway is nuclear weapons can be used to keep stability, but the arms agreements and discussion needs to be had in order to keep the fingers on the grenade.
We've got to look at the big context in which those weapons exist, yes.
Jim Dratras, appreciate your expertise today.